Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. An arson investigation is now underway as rare wildfires sweep through Long Island. Multiple injuries are reported after a small plane crashed in Pennsylvania and the search for a college student who vanished on spring break. We begin with the small plane crash in Pennsylvania. Several people were injured when the plane went down in a parking lot near a retirement village. On Long Island, strong winds whipped up rare wildfires that threatened several neighborhoods and shut down the main highway in the Hamptons. Dozens of fire companies remain on alert, and now authorities have launched an investigation into possible arson. The fighting in Syria has now claimed more than 1,300 lives, many of them civilians. Now new concerns the violence could spread months after the fall of the Assad regime and following years of bloody civil war. An urgent search on land, air, and water for a college student missing while on spring break in the Dominican Republic. The junior from the University of Pittsburgh was last seen Thursday morning. What we're learning about the investigation and what the State Department is saying about travel to that country. The tariff whiplash President Trump defends is on again, off again tariffs against Canada and Mexico, while warning they could go even higher. Tens of thousands of Mexicans rally in a show of national unity to celebrate the latest pause on those tariffs. And Canada's ruling party gets a new leader to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the midst of threats of a trade war. Several people are injured after a customer drove his car into a dealership with people diving for cover. An investigation is underway into what triggered the incident. Top college basketball teams play beat the clock, the thrilling overtime wins ahead of March Madness. Thousands march in Selma, Alabama, marking 60 years since Bloody Sunday, a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. What today's leaders hope we can learn from the past. And a new beginning for a historic church, the congregation that never lost its faith.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. We begin with breaking news. Multiple people were injured after a small plane crashed in a parking lot in southern Pennsylvania, just east of Harrisburg. 5 people were on board that single-engine plane. Emergency crews rushing to the scene of the fiery crash near a retirement village. The crash apparently caused several cars to burst into flames. Authorities say the plane may have skidded about 100 feet after it first hit the ground. The FAA is planning to investigate, and the new details coming in tonight. ABC's Ike Ejiochi leads us off.
Tonight, a devastating crash in Pennsylvania. The fiery wreckage right near a retirement village in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A private plane plunging into this parking lot just steps from homes. Cars set ablaze.
Units responding to the airport crash.
The smoke seen for miles. Authorities say 5 people were on board the Beechcraft Bonanza that crashed around 3 p.m. near the Lancaster airport. The pilot can be heard on air traffic control telling the tower that his plane has an open door and he needs to go back to the airport.
Lancaster Tower, Bonanza 347 Mike has an open door. We need to return for a landing.
Seconds later, the control is heard telling the pilots to pull up.
Pull up.
Today's crash just weeks after 7 people were killed when a medvac jet crashed into a Philadelphia neighborhood just minutes after takeoff. Lindsay, the FAA says 5 people were on board that plane, and local authorities are reporting several injuries on the ground. And the NTSB, they're monitoring the situation. Lindsay?
Terrifying images there, Ike. Thank you. Now to those rare wildfires in New York's Long Island near some of the most affluent neighborhoods in the country. The governor has declared a state of emergency. Plumes of smoke visible for miles, gusty winds down trees, and abnormally dry conditions are fueling those flames. 4 wildfires have already scorched more than 600 acres and damaged 2 commercial buildings. ABC's Morgan Norwood is on the scene tonight.
Tonight, a state of emergency in New York. First responders continuing to battle fast-moving wildfires in eastern Long Island.
Holy
scorching more than 600 acres near densely populated areas in the Hamptons.
The building on the north side is starting to burn up right now.
3 of the fires now put out. Officials saying a 4th is just over 20% contained following a massive response. More than 80 fire departments and 10 EMS units deployed. Dry and breezy conditions fueling the fire's rapid spread.
There were winds 35 miles an hour and above yesterday that drove this fire. There was also a lot of downed trees in this vicinity.
My whole place
2 commercial buildings damaged, including Mark Cirillo's gate systems business.
It looked like a tornado. It was all smoke at that point. I couldn't see the flames, and at that point the fire exploded, and the flames went up and over the building.
Officials warn the fire threat is not over.
Had this wind blown to the southwest, this fire would have ravaged through potentially Eastport, the business district. Could have been a very different fire.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
We met resident Doug Steinberg, who says he could see the thick black smoke from his West Hampton home and that he and his family had an emergency plan.
We always keep a go bag handy. We know all the back roads out of town and all the ways that are less wooded.
It comes as the Northeast continues to see an increase in fire-related activity. According to NOAA, many states in the region, including New York, saw record numbers of monthly red flag warnings within the past year.
And Lindsay, investigators here in West Hampton Beach are working to determine how and where these fires started. Lindsay, they're interviewing every 911 caller from that afternoon and poring over video footage. Lindsay?
Morgan, thank you. Next tonight, the urgent search for a college student missing in the Dominican Republic. Sudiksha Kunanki, a 20-year-old University of Pittsburgh student, vanished while on spring break. A team of international, state, and local authorities are now involved in the search. Here's ABC's Perry Russom.
Tonight, the desperate search for a college student on spring break missing in the Dominican Republic. A helicopter flying above the water off Punta Cana, searching for Sudiksha Kunanki, seen here on this missing poster. Search and rescue teams starting today before sunrise. Dive teams joining the search. Dominican officials say the 20-year-old University of Pittsburgh student was last seen on surveillance camera Thursday just before 5 in the morning. Tonight, late word from the Dominican Republic. Authorities say they now believe Kunanki may have drowned. They say they were told she was on the beach with a group. Some of them left. She stayed and went swimming with someone. Kunanki is an Indian citizen living in Virginia outside Washington, D.C. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office in Virginia says she was traveling with 5 other women, all students at Pitt, including her best friend from high school. Investigators say the women are believed to have been staying at the same hotel in Punta Cana, the Hotel Riu Republica, according to the Dominican Foreign Ministry. All 6 women were scheduled to return on Friday. The 5 friends are still in the Dominican Republic.
And Lindsay, there is desperation to find this missing student. Officials in the Dominican Republic are entering the 5th day of the search. Lindsay?
All right, Perry, for us. Thanks so much. Now to those deadly clashes across Syria. The death toll is now more than 1,300, and most of the victims are civilians. This is the worst outbreak of violence since Bashar al-Assad was toppled 3 months ago. And we want to warn you that some of these images may be disturbing. More now from ABC's Lama Hassan.
Concerns mounting across the world as the staggering death toll rises in Syria tonight. Syrians now burying their dead after brutal violence rips through the country, still recovering from the fall of the Assad regime. More than 1,300 people killed so far, most of them civilians. The deadliest few days since the conflict began 14 years ago. Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemning what he calls the radical Islamist terrorists, including foreign jihadis that murdered people in western Syria, adding that the interim authorities must hold those responsible accountable. The violence breaking out on Thursday after pro-Bashar al-Assad loyalists ambushed and killed 16 members of the government's security forces. The fighting then spreading with revenge killings for those deaths. With reports of mass executions and entire families killed, the images circulating online are too horrific to show. Syria's security forces are scrambling to stop the fighting from spreading, sending convoys and setting up checkpoints in the country's western coast, where the deadly clashes first erupted. And Lindsay, tonight, Syria's interim leader Ahmed al-Shara is calling for national unity and peace, vowing to bring those responsible for the violence to justice. Lindsay.
And Lama, I know you're also tracking breaking news out of Gaza. Israel says that they've stopped sending electricity to the people there. What's the explanation?
Lindsay, you'll remember that most of Gaza hasn't had access to electricity from Israel since the beginning of the war, but it will affect the desalination plants, which provide clean drinking water and will likely have a huge impact on Gazans. And remember, this is a week after Israel blocked much needed humanitarian aid, the delivery of food, fuel and medicines during the holy month of Ramadan, all part of Israel's efforts to turn up the pressure on Hamas and force them to release the remaining hostages. Lindsay.
A dozen of those hostages still believed to be alive. Lama, thank you. Now to the trade war and President Trump threatening to impose even higher tariffs. The president dismissed concerns over his back and forth on tariffs, but critics say it's creating uncertainty for businesses and the economy. And what the president is saying tonight about a possible recession. Here's our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang.
Tonight, President Trump declining to rule out a recession as the economy starts to take a hit from his chaotic trade policy.
There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. It takes a little time.
The president offering no clarity after a dizzying week of on-again then off-again tariffs.
The tariffs could go up as time goes by, and they may go up, and, I don't know if it's predictability.
Trump announcing 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, wiping out the stock market gains since Election Day. Days later, pausing tariffs until April 2nd, then 24 hours later, threatening another round of tariffs on Canadian lumber and dairy. Trump saying he paused tariffs to help Mexico and Canada. But his top economic advisor telling ABC's Jonathan Karl that the tariffs are about stopping fentanyl from coming into the U.S.
As we've watched them make progress on the drug war, then we've relaxed some of the tariffs that we've put on them.
Yet less than 1% of fentanyl that enters the U.S. comes from Canada, while Mexico says seizures have declined 50% between October and January. ABC's Matt Rivers tracking the reaction in Mexico.
Thousands of people here in the heart of Mexico City to hear from Mexico's president in what was supposed to be a rally against U.S. tariffs that's turned into a victory lap of sorts for her after those tariffs were postponed.
Democrats slamming Trump's trade policy.
They're destroying the economy and they're making it harder and harder for Americans to afford things.
But Sean Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers Union, praising Trump's tariffs for bringing jobs in manufacturing back to the U.S.
Tariffs are an attempt to stop the bleeding from the hemorrhaging of jobs in America for the last 33 years.
Trump officials admit his policies could impact prices.
Yes, some products that are made foreign might be more expensive, but American products will get cheaper, and that's the point.
And Lindsay, some conflicting messages from the White House tonight. President Trump says those tariffs on Canadian lumber and dairy imports could go into effect tomorrow, but his Commerce Secretary says those are planned for April 2nd. The president is also planning to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports on Wednesday. Lindsay?
Lots of uncertainty about those tariffs. Selena, thank you. Now to Canadians heading to the polls today to elect a new leader. President Trump is casting a large shadow over this contest after imposing tariffs and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Let's bring in ABC's Phil Lipoff. And Phil, what can you tell us about the results?
Well, so far, Lindsay, we know that tonight Canada's Liberal Party will elect a new leader to take on that challenge you were talking about of how to handle President Trump and his threats against Canada's economy and really its sovereignty. The top candidates to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are former central bank governor Mark Carney and former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Both are critical of Trump, his trade policy, and the threats really to make Canada, as you mentioned, the 51st state have reverberated across that country. The winner will face voters again in a national election, Lindsay, in the coming months.
Phil, thank you. Next tonight, chaos at a CarMax dealership in Inglewood, California. Police say 8 people were injured when a driver rammed a vehicle into the showroom, sending terrified customers and workers running for cover. A driver was later arrested by police. ABC's Zareen Shah has the new details coming in tonight.
Tonight, authorities are investigating after a driver allegedly turned a car into a weapon, injuring multiple people. Dramatic video showing a driver plowing a car through this used car dealership in Inglewood, California on Saturday afternoon. At least 8 customers and employees injured, 2 of them critically, according to the LA County Fire Department. The company saying the still unidentified suspect later placed under arrest.
broke the frame, glass, and it went everywhere. Everybody started freaking out.
According to CarMax, the driver was having a car appraised at the time. But it's unclear what set the customer off before getting back into the car, witnesses say, and reversing through the front door before speeding out the other side. CarMax saying safety is a top priority, and their hearts go out to everyone involved. And this investigation is still ongoing. Meanwhile, CarMax says they are currently implementing their own plan of action. Lindsay.
Zoreen, thank you. Now to a seminal moment in the civil rights movement, the 60th anniversary of what is now known as Bloody Sunday. Marchers linking arms and crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. 60 years ago, peaceful protesters were brutally beaten by state troopers and local police. Why some say there's still unfinished business in Selma, Alabama. More now from ABC's Alex Prochet.
Today, crowds gathered in Selma, Alabama to mark the 60th anniversary of a key turning point in the civil rights movement. Reverend Al Sharpton saying the fight for equality continues.
Today, they are threatening the same rights that they went across that bridge to deal with 60 years ago.
Demonstrators marching between there and Montgomery in 1965 in an effort to loosen Jim Crow's hold on the South. As they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the 600 peaceful protesters were met by state troopers on horseback, armed with batons, tear gas, and hate. The chaos captured on camera, images spreading around the world. The moral outrage led to President Lyndon Johnson's signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, just 5 months after what became known as Bloody Sunday. One of the march organizers was a boy from Troy, John Lewis, who would go on to serve more than 3 decades in Congress. In 2015, sharing a stage with Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush during the 50th anniversary ceremony. Lewis died in 2020. Tonight, his spirit and that of other civil rights icons marches on.
And when you see injustice, always be prepared to show up, to stand up, and to speak up for what is right.
Lindsay, since 2020, there have been several unsuccessful attempts to pass legislation named after Congressman John Lewis that would strengthen the Voting Rights Act. And most recently, a bill was introduced this week. Lindsay?
Alex, thank you. There's still much more ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday. Good to the last shot, the buzzer beaters that could shake up the college basketball rankings. And they were stuck for hours. A busy highway was completely shut down because of late season snow. Next tonight, a fierce winter storm left drivers stranded for hours in Arizona this weekend. Traffic was backed up for 15 miles on Interstate 40 with multiple accidents. 20 inches of snow fell in Flagstaff, more than 2 feet in Williams. Meanwhile, in the eastern half of the country this week, an early taste of spring. Highs will be in the 60s, 70s, even 80s in some places. And when we come back down to the wire, some thrilling overtime wins to get you ready for March Madness. To the index, and look at this, a pair of buzzer beaters. Number 7 Alabama stunned top-ranked Auburn 93-91 in overtime. Mark Sears got the game winner, an off-balance floater from the foul line. Number 6 St. John's stole the ball and the game. Zuby Ejiochi got the winning basket to beat Marquette 86-84. For the women, the conference tournaments are wrapping up. Today, Duke won its first ACC championship in 12 years, beating top-seeded NC State 76-62. The defending national champion South Carolina took the SEC crown, beating Texas 64-45. The NCAA Women's Selection Show is coming up 1 week from tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. in the West on ESPN. When we come back, it took a lot of work and a whole lot of prayer, but a historic church has once again opened its doors. Finally tonight, it's a new beginning for a congregation thanks to their faith, hope, and love. Today, there is literally new life in this sanctuary, in keeping with its namesake, new life at Calvary Church.
We thank you, Lord, to be back in our space.
18 months ago, when an EF1 tornado hit Cleveland, it blew the roof off this historic church, which dates back to 1890, causing millions in damage, with nothing separating the church from the heavens.
Isn't this a happy day?
But today, 563 days later, after rebuilding the roof and restoring the inside of the church, services were back in this sacred space. Pastor Kelly Sullivan shared with our Cleveland station WEWS what she missed most.
The sacredness, the holiness, the beauty of the architecture, the stained glass windows, our choir.
grateful pastor full of gratitude, and yet another example of answered prayer.
You are so amazing, Holy Spirit. Thank you for seeing us through.
Counting their blessings. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Lindsay Davis in New York. David's right back here tomorrow. Until then, good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.